I suppose good afternoon, everyone, and the subject of this talk is the Spanish Armada galleass La Girona that lies in Northern Irish territorial waters off our north coast. It was wrecked in 1588, rediscovered in the late 1960s by the Belgian salvage diver Robert Stenuy, and designated under the PWA in 1993. So we're marking 50 years of the PWA, but also, in some respects, 30 years of designation for the Girona. Now, I'm speaking to you from my home office in the coastal town of Portrush, County Antrim, and the wreck site is about 7 miles due east from here and close to the famous World Heritage Site of the Giant's Causeway. Now, the wreck is something of an iconic status here in Northern Ireland. At different times, it is featured on our regional banknotes, in local place names, and even the local town brewery here in Portrush has got in on the action and has named itself Lacada Point, where the wreck lies. Now, my direct involvement with the Girona site is a relatively recent one and dates back to 2014 when I started working for the Department of Environment as their retained marine archaeologist. Now, at that time, the Girona remained Northern Ireland's only statutorily protected historic wreck site. But in the intervening years, we have scheduled 3 further wrecks under our own domestic heritage legislation, the Historic Monuments and Archaeological Objects Order 1995. So we've scheduled just in the last years the World War I armoured cruiser HMS Drake, the World War II transport Lochgarry, which was involved in Operation Dynamo, and a 19th century wooden trading bark called the Devereux. And all these wrecks are located up here on the north coast, off the Antrim coast. From 2016, after reorganisation of Northern Ireland government departments, the Department for Communities and the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs have been collaborating with regard to Northern Ireland's statutory and policy obligations relating to submerged cultural heritage sites in Northern Ireland's marine environment. And this collaboration had been in play prior to this when both historic environment and marine environment management were both within the former Department of Environment. This slide shows the current organisation of the Historic Environment Division, and you'll see Marine Archaeology sitting currently with the Heritage Records and Designation branch. But in reality, this amounts to a single archaeologist seconded out to Dara Marine and Fisheries Division to advise on marine licensing, marine planning, etc., and avail of what we term collaborative synergies. But essentially, the Marine Division have the boats, the kit, and the Department for Communities don't. So it has been a useful collaboration. The division has a broad remit and includes identification and designation of monuments, buildings, and landscapes for protection, provision of advice on development planning, compilation and maintenance of historic environment records, and the protection and conservation of state care monuments. With regard to the marine historic environment, we have set out our principal objectives in a 2019 position statement, which is available online if you search out conserving the marine heritage. Now, I'll also discuss further the legal implications of the Girona's protection and its management later on in my talk. But for now, I really wanted just to turn to the events of 1588 and sort of replay that understanding as to how the Girona ended up wrecked off the north of Ireland. So, as we all know, on the 21st of July, 1588, an armada of 130 ships left Spain with the sole purpose of invading England. Philip II, the Catholic King of Spain, with papal support, had set his sights on the throne of England and on overturning the Protestant Queen Elizabeth. The Duke of Parma, with his land forces in the Spanish Netherlands, was meant to rendezvous with the Armada off the Flanders coast, but was hindered by the combined efforts of an English and Dutch blockade. Upon reaching the Scilly Isles on the 29th of July and Cornwall the day after, the Spanish fleet were engaged by the English fleet. And on this particular depiction, we can see one of the 4 galleasses, and I've just zoomed up to so you can sort of see the depiction of one of the galleass, perhaps the Girona. Now, By the 7th of August, the Spanish had been scattered off Calais, owing no small part to the tactical use of fire ships by the English. And following a more decisive battle, the Spanish fleet was driven north by adverse winds. Now, rather than attempting to turn and head directly for Spain, the rather disastrous decision was taken to keep going north along the east coast of England and around the north and west coasts of Scotland and Ireland. The combination of extreme weather conditions, damaged ships, exhausted crews, lack of supplies, and poor decision-making by the Spanish commanders resulted in the loss of large numbers of Spanish ships. And of the original fleet of 130, up to 26 ships may have been lost around the coast of Ireland. We know the names of about 14 of these wrecks, but possibly as many as 40 in all were lost on that return journey to Spain. Now, the sites of 8 wrecks have now been confirmed by hard archaeological evidence, providing between them examples of many of the types of ship which sailed with the Armada. 6 of these sites have been discovered and investigated around the Irish coast, including the remains of the Girona. The 6 ships are the Neapolitan galleass Girona, found and excavated by Robert Stenuy off the coast of Antrim between 1967 and 1968, and the focus of this talk. The Basque-built Santa Maria de la Rosa, found and excavated off the southwest of Ireland at Blasket Sound from 1969 by Sidney Wignall and his team. And interestingly, this vessel was built, or is believed to have been built, in San Sebastian by the noted Villafranca whaling family, and is paralleled by the mid-16th century whaling ship thought to be the San Juan, discovered in Red Bay, Labrador in 1978 by Parks Canada archaeologists and subsequently excavated. A further wreck is the Venetian troop carrier, La Trinidad Valenciera, which was discovered in Kinnigo Bay by a local diving club in County Donegal. And this shipwreck was investigated in a series of excavation campaigns directed by Dr. Colin Martin between 1971 and 1983. Colin was also involved in the investigations of the Rostock-built hulk El Gran Griffon of the Fair Isle in Scotland. And I think Colin was also involved with Wignall's project at Blasket Sound. There's also the remains of 3 Levantine ships, the Santa Maria de Vaison, the Juliana, and the Lavia. And these were discovered off Strudestrand, County Sligo in 1985. These wrecks came under a protection order by the Irish government and have been subject to recent investigation in 2015 by the Underwater Archaeology Unit in the National Monument Service, during which 9 ornate bronze guns were recovered from the wreck of La Juliana. And I was fortunate enough to be involved with that excavation and recovery project. A further member of the ill-fated Levant squadron, the San Juan de Sicilia, was wrecked in Tobermory Bay, Mull, though its remains have all but been destroyed by more than 3 centuries of determined hunting for the ship's reputed treasure. And I've heard Dr. Paula Martin provide an excellent account of this wreck at conference presentations held here in Ireland in recent years. Now, the Girona was one of 4 heavily armed galleasses from Naples. It was a hybrid combination of sailing ship and oared galley. They'd been built some 10 years earlier, around about 1578, to combine the mobility of a galley with the firepower of a galleon. For the Armada campaign, their lateen-sailed Mediterranean rig had been replaced with a square sail configuration more suited to the Atlantic conditions. You'll see that again in that depiction. However, they were slow under oars, while their length and windage made them clumsy under sail. The galleasses suffered another chronic weakness, which proved fatal to 2 of them. Their broad rudders hung awkwardly on curved stem posts and were particularly susceptible to damage. Now, when the Girona left Lisbon, the Girona carried a crew of around about 122 officers, 2 mates, 39 gunners, 10 helmsmen, 27 able seamen, and 21 sailors. There were 244 rowers, which comprised 161 convicts, 15 slaves, and 68 volunteers. Also embarked were around about 190 foot soldiers. The flag galleass, the San Lorenzo, mounted 6 heavy pieces in her bow. The largest of these were 50-pounders. A further 20 pieces of 4 to 12-pound calibers occupied the restricted space within the castle works. And because of the rowing banks, the ship could have no continuous gun decks. So the raised catwalks above the benches on either side would have bristled with up to 20 swivel guns. Now, the Girona, Zuniga, and Napolitana were virtually identical to the San Lorenzo and would have been equipped in a similar fashion. So together they represented quite a formidable force. We know how much shot and powder the Girona carried and what other provisions were aboard from the list kept in the Simancas archives in the Public Record Office in Spain, which have been interrogated by Colin Martin and Geoffrey Parker. Of the 4 galleasses, 2 would eventually return to Spain, the Zuniga and the Napolitana, or in the case of the Zuniga, to Spanish-controlled France. The Zuniga and Napolitana would later be wrecked in 1591 in Spanish waters and have been subject to investigation by Spanish maritime archaeologist Miguel San Claudio. The San Lorenzo broke her rudder and ran aground at Calais and was taken by the enemy, while the Girona, having lost her rudder for the 3rd time, was swept by a gale onto the rocks at Lacada Point near the Giant's Causeway in an attempt by her passengers and crew to reach the relatively safe and predominantly Catholic west coast of Scotland. Now, we know the Girona was sheltering and making repairs in Killybegs harbour when news of her whereabouts reached the survivors of 2 other Spanish ships who were holding up in a small Gaelic-Irish castle on an island in Kilturris Lake near Lochrismore Bay in County Donegal, situated some 30 kilometres to the north of Killybegs. Now, these Spanish moved to rendezvous with the Girona at Killybegs, leaving behind them a single cannon, a small cast iron gun at the castle at Kilturris, where it lay until rediscovered by Stenuy in 1968. And a picture of this cannon was published in National Geographic magazine at this time. So we see here Stenuy recording that cannon. So it was just literally laying there from it's from 1588, so it's quite remarkable. Shortly afterwards, this cannon was bought from the local farmer and taken away, and for quite a number of years disappeared and thought to have become something of a garden ornament at somebody's house. But fortunately, the cannon has found its way to the Ulster Museum in Belfast and is now on display. Now, the Spanish would have known that news of their whereabouts had reached the English authorities, and it was only a matter of time before English forces would have moved against them. With the headwind still holding and winter coming, it was decided to make for the west of Scotland, which was Catholic. It is thought that about 1,300 men embarked on the Girona, well over the ship's safe carrying capacity, just before dawn on the 26th of October, 1588. It was later that night, midnight by some accounts, that the Girona would be wrecked. Other writers placed the wrecking on the morning of the 26th. A contemporary account relayed from a spy to the Lord Deputy reads, quote, "Said galley departed from the said harbour," i.e. Killybegs, with as many of the Spaniards as she could carry, and sailing along the coast towards the outer isles of Scotland, whither they were then bound, struck against the rock of Bunboyce, where both ship and men perished, save only 5 who hardly got to shore. This rock of Bunboyce is hard by Sorley Boy's house. Now, the house was in fact Dunluce Castle, now an important monument in the care of the state and managed by my department. And it is said that the considerable treasure that the Laird MacDonald recovered was used the following year to rebuild and modernise the castle. The location of Bunboyce is thought to refer to the rocks of the Bush estuary, the Bush being a river that empties into the sea just between the Giant's Causeway and Dunluce Castle. And it's depicted as such on 16th century maps. Now, Numerous Armada historians had placed the Girona at varying locations, including Dunluce Castle, or just off it, the Giant's Causeway, and the Bush Estuary, or the Bun Boyce. But T.P. Kilfeather referred to Port España in his 1967 book, Ireland, Graveyard of the Spanish Armada, and John Knox Lawton, Spaniard Rock, in his compilation of state papers relating to the defeat of the Spanish Armada. Stenuy had also picked up on the distinctive place names depicted on the 19th century Ordnance Survey maps, Spaniard Rock, Spaniard Cave, and Port España. Further to this, Stenuy recounts in his book, Treasures of the Armada, of buying a guidebook to the Giant's Causeway with the following line in it, quote, "In 1588, the galleass Girona was wrecked at a little cove near the Giant's Causeway, still called Port España." On 27th of June, 1967, Robert Stenuy dived at Port España, and on his first dive discovered a lead ingot stamped with 5 Jerusalem crosses. These lead ingots were used for casting musket shot, etc. And further investigation during that same dive led Stenuy to find a bronze cannon, a demi-saker, and a breech loading piece, breech loading blocks, cannonballs, a copper coin, and more lead ingots. He had found the wreck, clearly. So at the end of April 1968, Stenuy returned to the site with a full team comprising Francis Dumont, Henry Deloise, Maurice Vidal, Louis Gorse, and an excellent underwater photographer in Mark Jasinski, as well as all the necessary equipment to carry out sort of an excavation and recovery project. Now, the underwater topography of Lacada Point is not one of smooth sand like Streeter Strand or Kinnago Bay. It is boulder strewn with thick kelp, and this underwater topography is also anything but static, and winter storms can move boulders of many tons with relative ease. The project took 2 seasons through 1968 and 1969, reputedly involving 6,000 hours of diving. Now, the work involved excavation, the removal of tons of overburden down to bedrock, and the physical breaking of concretions. And we know Stenuy's team used jacks and water jets in order to recover material. See here also the use of lifting bags to lift larger items. We do not know really how much recording took place. However, amongst the imagery, there is that of a diver taking offsets or triangulating, and clearly a photographic record was kept. But I think it's fair to say the best account we have of what happened during those 2 seasons probably remains Stenuy's book, Treasures of the Armada. Now, Stenuy and his team worked within the law, and he was careful to acquire legal title to the wreck as salver in possession. He had a buoyed sign at the site and informed the local receiver of wreck of his intentions. And at that time, we actually had a local receiver's office in Coleraine Town, which is quite close by. But after news of the discovery broke in 1968, on 26th of May, divers from Belfast descended on the site, according to Stenuy, quote, armed with ice axes and lifting balloons. And something of a running physical and verbal battle ensued between the 2 groups of divers, with Stenuy's men seeing off the would-be looters. The national press had a field day with the story. The Daily Mail led with the headline, "Storm on the Seabed as rival divers clash." The Daily Express, "Deep sea fight over wreck." And the Daily Mirror, "Spanish treasure ship divers in undersea clash." On the 31st of May, Mr. Justice Lowry of the Supreme Court in Northern Ireland ruled, "There is good evidence that Mr. Stenuy is indeed the exclusive salver in possession." From this point on, Stenuy's recovery project appears to have been allowed to continue unhindered. And the results of Stenuy's recovery operations at the Girona site were nothing short of spectacular. And I think one of the most important and enduring aspects of this work was that the material was not sold off at public auction to the highest bidder. Stenuy was determined that the material should not be dispersed at public auction, and after 2 years of legal negotiations and a public appeal, the recovered artefacts were acquired by the Ulster Museum in Belfast at an agreed valuation and preserved for the common good. Much credit must go to the director of the museum at the time, Wilfred Seabed, and the great effort and imagination of the Keeper of Antiquities, Lawrence Flanagan, who recognised the true worth of the find and the potential of underwater archaeology. Credit too must be given to the Northern Ireland government, which provided 85% of the finance required for the acquisition, with the remaining monies being raised by public subscription in 6 months. Such was the public interest in this important find at the time. I often think that this must have been something of a welcome distraction from the troubles for the people of Northern Ireland, and the Girona would have had top news billing, if only for a short time. Just turning to some of the artifacts from the Girona. So this is just a picture of the Girona exhibition in the Ulster Museum in Belfast, really worth seeing. So among the material recovered from the wreck were 2 pieces of bronze ordnance and the muzzle of a third. In this picture taken in the Ulster Museum, we can see the breech-loading bronze esmeralda and some breech blocks. The bronze breech block apparently was found in position in the esmeralda and with its charge of gunpowder still intact. The other complete cannon is the bronze half-saker. There was an assortment of navigation equipment. In this picture, we can see the bronze astrolabe, sounding leads, and bronze navigational dividers. This particular set of dividers are actually from the Trinidad Balancera, but 4 similar sets were found at the Girona site. And again, I think the wooden mariner's compass is also from the Trinidad Balancera. Some 405 gold coins and 756 silver coins, as well as 115 of copper. Pictured here is a gold 4 escudos from the Seville Mint on the left, I think, and the mint, and this mint accounted for 85% of the Girona coin finds. And then we have a further gold escudo from the Naples Mint. Pictured here, a selection of small arms, in this case knife handles on the top left, fragments of elaborately decorated silverware, and a set of silver candlesticks, and top right, these copper buckles. The major discovery, however, was the collection of Renaissance jewellery, gold rings, pendants, and chains, which formed at the time a considerable addition to the known collections of this type of jewellery. The Girona would have been carrying members of the Spanish aristocracy, as well as high-ranking members of the clergy. It is thought the Bishop of Killaloe, Killaloe being in County Clare in Ireland, is thought to have been aboard the Girona when lost. In this image, we have the famous salamander pendant of gold and rubies, a talisman against fire, various orders of chivalry, such as this cross of the Order of St. John, cross of the Order of Alcantara, and cross of the Order of Santiago. Gold rings, pictured here, the famous lover's token ring, with one terminal in the form of a hand holding a heart, and bearing the inscription translated, "I have nothing more to give thee," and a religious ring with the sacred IHS monogram, often associated with the Jesuit order. Another religious item, bottom left, a small gold reliquary with a representation of St. John the Baptist, and this would have contained little wax tablets made from candles blessed by the Pope, and believed to have protective properties for the wearer. Now, one of the great disappointments for maritime archaeologists was that little of the ship survived. In fact, not one plank was preserved. Partly, it is believed, because of the shallowness of the site. The core area of the site is less than 10 meters, and the very exposed nature of the wreck site. So perhaps as the wreck broke up, pieces would have floated away and or drifted off and sunk in deeper water. And yet, we do know Stenui's team did recover some incredibly fragile artifacts, such as the crystal and silver cent dropper pictured on this slide. Stenui also describes in his book breaking apart concretions of, quote, rusted cannonballs, kitchen debris of animal bones, charcoal, broken pots and cartridges, and cemented again by the gunpowder. In the years following Stenui's departure, other divers visited the site. They talk of using underwater jackhammers to break the remaining concretions apart in their pursuit of treasure. I think we have to ask ourselves how much more information could have been gleaned from the Girona site had it been investigated scientifically, or these concretions disassembled within the setting of a lab. But in the context of the time, I think Stenui's excavations were probably the best balance that could be expected between commercial exploitation and heritage preservation. From 1970 until the site was formally protected in 1993 under the Protection of Wrecks Act, it was open season essentially at the Girona site. And again, the official records tell us little of what went on, although we can probably count on the accession records of the Ulster Museum to tell us what may have been acquired during that period. And we do know some further items were being acquired from local divers and other divers coming into the area. The backdrop of the site's protection in 1993 is linked to the fact that responsibilities for maritime archaeology were passed from Westminster to Northern Ireland in 1992. An agency agreement being signed between the then Department of Environment Northern Ireland and what was then the Department of National Heritage in Westminster. At this time, marine heritage management was very much viewed through the prism of Section 1 of the Protection of Wrecks Act 1973. The Girona was designated in April 1993, and the Archaeological Diving Unit based at St Andrews, who at the time held the PWA diving contract, had dived the site in 1991 after reports that members of a local diving club, in fact my local diving club, the Portrush Sack, were continuing to find and recover artefacts from the wreck, especially after severe storms. The site was deemed at risk and its significance was never in doubt. An area 600 meters in diameter was designated as a restricted area, but the true extent of the site, I feel, is probably yet to be truly determined. It was now an offence for unauthorised persons to tamper with, damage or remove any part of the wreck or its contents, to carry out diving salvage operations, and to deposit anything which would obliterate or obstruct access to the site. So essentially activity from this point on could only be undertaken under licence. The site was dived again by the Archaeological Diving Unit through the 1990s, and a local licensee was appointed from 1997. A number of objects were observed during these visits, including a square cross-section concretion, a broken anchor, stone shot, and unidentifiable fragments of copper alloy objects. The largest concretion discovered by the licensee was thought to be a further iron cannon, but this was not confirmed, as just before the ADU visited in 1995, this cannon was in fact stolen from the site. Now, when Stenui finished his excavations in 1969, he thought the site was quote, exhausted for all reasonable purposes. And since this time, various groups and individuals have dived in the area and reached the same general conclusion. But a site like the Girona can never be truly exhausted completely, and the discovery of the missing 12th cameo by the then licensee in 1998 demonstrated that the site retained significant archaeological potential. So what of the site today, and what can we say about it? In short, and surprisingly, relatively little. My colleague Colin Dunlop and I have been working through some of the old departmental files containing ADU and licensee reports. And one thing we did come across was a photocopy of this unattributed plan of the site, which we're assuming is based on information gleaned from Stenui, perhaps by the ADU, as we do know they did have some correspondence in the early 1990s. The plan shows the limits of the excavation work, aspects of the seabed topography, and the rough location of artifacts. I think What is interesting is that Stenui's efforts were largely concentrated in what was quite a discrete area on the eastern side of Lacada Point. And in his communications with the ADU, he stated that if excavations were to resume, it should be in the narrow bay between Lacada Point and Spanish Rock, marked Spanish Cave, which was an area that he felt his team had not fully investigated. Now, by investigation, I imagine he probably meant quite an invasive investigation, which we can assume may have been undertaken by other parties after Stenui's departure between the years 1970 and 1993. Now, we have georeferenced the drawing in GIS software and mapped the seabed topography as depicted. Further to this, we have digitized the plan and added, where possible, licensee finds and anecdotal evidence from other local divers. Perhaps one of the more interesting stories is that the stolen cannon never did make it off the site, and it lies unlocated in deeper water to the northeast of Lacada Point, jettisoned during an abortive attempt to raise it, and is still waiting to be rediscovered. I actually interviewed one of the divers who was involved in that abortive attempt to steal that cannon, and at the time it was basically a bunch of teenage divers in a very small inflatable, and when they got the cannon strapped to the underside of a little dinghy, it started to pull the boat underwater, so they were forced to cut it free. Now, this mapping work will inform future diving at the site. The site has been taken into a program of dive inspection since 2015 by the Marine Scientific Dive Team within the Marine Fisheries Division. And the purpose of this work has really been to help establish sort of a more ongoing program of environmental monitoring and help inform the development of maybe a future management plan for the site. But there's also the opportunity to preserve any tangible remains by record, and in conversation with the museum to recover any artifacts deemed at risk if it is practical to recover, conserve and curate the find. But in reality, since 2015, we've dived the site in that year, in 2018, last in 2021. So, I mean, it hasn't been an annual occurrence, and COVID has got in the way, but we do hope to return to the site in the sort of next 4 or 5 months. Now, also over the last years, we've also worked with or tried at least to work with the media to promote the protected status of the site alongside the now to be expected media preoccupation with Spanish treasure. In 2018, we took Dan Snow diving on the site for the One Show, and more recently, Michael Portillo featured the wreck on his great coastal railway journeys program. But again, very keen to promote the protected wreck status and try to move the media away from that preoccupation with treasure. And I think both Michael Portillo and Dan Snow very much got that, and it turned out to be sort of quite good programming. Further to this, we've also seen renewed interest in Ireland and Spain in the Armada story and its shipwreck legacy here in Ireland, with international Spanish Armada conferences being held in Sligo in the Republic of Ireland and Coleraine in Northern Ireland. And there's been much excitement and expectation following the work done at the site of the Juliana wreck at Strida in 2015, which I alluded to earlier. And these various events have been attended by Spanish and Irish diplomats, naval personnel, and academics from Spain, Portugal, Italy, Sweden, and the UK. And it is interesting to note that the respective Spanish and Irish ministries of culture have, I believe, signed an MOU regarding joint working on the common inheritance that are the wrecks of the Spanish Armada. And while the Girona site lies in Northern Ireland or UK territorial waters, the group value of the Irish sites represents really, I think, a significant collective resource that transcends political boundaries. The Girona site, through further study and investigations, may still yield information, but as we found, there'll be no quick wins, as the site is very exposed and really only diveable on the calmest of days. The seabed is rocky and strewn with boulders and gullies, and obscured for much of the year by thick kelp. But with concerted effort and the application of remote sensing and diver-led metal detecting, more discoveries might be expected, not least the missing cannon. This image reveals the nature of the seabed. It is an accurate topographic map created using multi-beam survey data, and we're probably all quite familiar with this technology now. This data set actually dates to about 2008, so it's quite old. And unfortunately, the large survey vessel at the time was unable to approach the shallows around Lacada Point. But the seabed topography to the north of the site is, so you can see, characterized by rocky gullies that may have received Girona-related material, such as maybe the heavier ship timbers and other parts of the superstructure of the ship. But it is a pretty vast area, and at a time of limited resources, we cannot expect too much. But I've always thought a worthwhile future study might involve modeling currents at the site and patterns of deposition in order to ascertain areas of search in the wider protected area. Both departments continue to work in partnership and maintain capacity to react to reports of illegal diving and or salvage at the Girona site. And in 2021, we carried out underwater inspections on the back of reports of illegal diving. We had essentially scheduled diving to happen in that year, but on the back of these reports, we're able to sort of present it through media channels as a sort of as us taking quite seriously these reports or allegations of illegal unlicensed diving at the site. And as I've said, while there's been no licensed diving at the site since 21, it is our intention to dive the site under license from DCMS in the next 3 to 4 months, if we can get a weather window, and utilize the wreck mapping to see if we can relocate any potential in situ artifacts or components of the wreck, which to date we have not been able to do. But I suppose just to finish up by saying, rest assured that the wreck of the Girona continues to be, a strong candidate for ongoing designation under the Protection of Wrecks Act in Northern Irish territorial waters. I was just going to finish up there, so thanks very much.
Thank you, Rory. Brilliant. If you want to turn your camera on and people can see that you're genuinely with us, it's not pre-recorded. There you go. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Where am I on my screen?
We can see you. Don't worry. We can see you. Thank you. Thank you very much for giving us that perspective and for going back. I mean, the journey back into the Stenway archives must be quite...
It's a bit of a retrospect, I admit.
Yeah. But I mean, the Northern Irish government stumping up, was it 85% to purchase, and then the public, you said the public raised the rest, sort of the 15%. Yeah,
by public subscription. I mean, there's two, I've come across two different conflicting accounts of how much was paid. One 130 odd thousand and the other 330 odd thousand, but either way, in today's money, about between either one or over 1 million or just over 3 million. So a considerable amount of money.
I wonder how much Stenway might have been able to get if he hadn't gone down that route in terms of the dispersing of the collection at auction.
Don't know. It's an interesting one. I'm aware that Sydney Wignall's excavation in the Blasket Sound, that the material that was recovered there, that did go to public auction, but there was nothing. I don't think amongst that collection of artifacts recovered there was anything like the high status gold and jewelry and what have you. But that certainly that collection was dispersed. And Ulster Museum at the time did acquire a small number of artifacts, but they were things like pewter plates and I don't want to use the word mundane, but they were wouldn't have had as high a cost, let's put it like that.
Do you do you ask questions, folks, if you have any, because we've got another minute or two before we have to move on. You talked about the losing its rudder for the third time. I mean, that's a lot of rudders to have to put on a ship.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm assuming that when they left Killybegs, they'd spent most of their time in Killybegs repairing the rudder and reprovisioning, and reportedly that's when they jettisoned all their cannon. So I know the Underwater Archaeology Unit and the National Monument Service have always been interested in Killybegs as the haven there is holding a big cache of Spanish Armada cannon from the Girona. But we did have the opportunity in around about 2005. There was a big dredging program in the harbour. They were creating a deep water berthage, and I actually worked on that project at the time as a consultant, monitoring those dredging works. But we didn't recover any of those cannon at the time.